I want to start with the stupidest thing I have ever done. Not the most expensive, not the most painful, not the one that cost me the most in the measurable currencies of money and time and the goodwill of people who deserved better. The stupidest. The one that when I describe it to people they get a specific expression, a kind of wincing admiration for the sheer confidence of the error. The way you admire a man who walks into a structural wall because he was so certain the wall wasn't there. I proposed to a woman I had known for 14 days. 14 days. 2 weeks. The amount of time it takes most people to learn a coworker's coffee order. The amount of time it takes to finish a reasonably sized novel if you are reading at a comfortable pace. The amount of time between meeting a woman in a city on the other side of the world that you have lived in for 3 months and getting down on one knee in a restaurant in the Philippines with a ring you bought from a jewelry stall in the public market for 4,000 pesos. That is where we start. And I want to tell you everything that happened next, because what happened next is not the story you are predicting. I know what story you are predicting. I predicted the same story from the inside, in the days before the next started happening, and the prediction was completely wrong, and being completely wrong was the beginning of the actual education, and the actual education is the reason I am sitting on this porch in Dumaguete at 66 years old, telling you any of this. My name is Joe. I spent 29 years as a high school football coach and physical education teacher in a town in rural Ohio called Millfield that has a population of 762 people, if you count the Hendersons, who technically live in the next township but who use the Millfield zip code and always have. I coached football for 29 years, and I taught PE for 29 years, and I was good at both of those things, in the specific way that people are good at things they believe in, which is completely and with the specific blindness that complete belief produces, the blindness that is also the source of the effectiveness. I believed in football the way some people believe in a religious practice, not the game exactly, the things the game required and revealed, the specific truths that physical competition under pressure produces about the people who engage in it, about who has reserves when the reserves are needed and who discovers they don't, about the relationship between preparation and performance, and the gap between what a person thinks they can do and what they actually can. I believed that those truths were worth teaching, and I taught them for 29 years, and I was not wrong about the truths. I was occasionally wrong about the teaching. I was married to a woman named Cheryl for 22 years. She taught kindergarten at the same school where I coached and taught, and we had the specific marriage of 2 teachers in a small town, which is a marriage conducted largely in public, in the way that small-town professions are conducted largely in public, where the community knows your business and has opinions about it and delivers those opinions with the frankness that small towns feel entitled to. Cheryl was a good woman and a better teacher than I was, and she left in 2018 for reasons that are her reasons, and that I have spent 4 years coming to understand well enough to accept, without the defensiveness that I initially brought to the accepting. We have 2 daughters, Bethany, 31, who is in Columbus, and who has her mother's patience and her father's stubbornness, in a combination that produces a woman who is extremely slow to decide things, and then absolutely immovable once she has decided them. And Lauren, 28, who is in Portland, and who calls more than Bethany, and whose calls are messier, and more frequent, and more necessary to both of us. I retired at 63. The combination of the pension and the Social Security that started at 63 because I took it early, because Millfield in retirement was a specific kind of quiet that I had not expected, and that I needed to not be inside, was $1,700 a month. In Millfield, Ohio, $1,700 a month was a retirement in the sense of surviving one. In the Philippines, $1,700 a month was something else entirely, and the something else was what I was in Dumaguete looking for when I met her. I had been in Dumaguete for 3 months when I met Divina. 3 months is long enough to have found the apartment I was renting, a small place off Hibbard Avenue near the university, for 8,500 pesos a month, and to have found the Turo Turo counter, 3 streets over, where a woman named Ate Bing had identified my preference for the sour dishes over the sweet ones, and acted on it daily. 3 months is long enough to have walked the boulevard enough times that the evening walk had become the structure around which the rest of the day organized itself. 3 months is long enough to have learned enough Cebuano to greet and thank and ask the price of things, and to say "I don't understand yet" in a way that made people laugh kindly and correct me. 3 months is not long enough to have the judgment that I am going to tell you I did not have. I met Divina at a birthday party for a man I had known for 6 weeks. The man was named Rodel. He was 54, and he ran a small transportation business, the kind that managed the logistics of moving goods between the island's towns. And he had the specific sociability of a man whose business required constant relationship maintenance, and who had therefore developed relationship maintenance into an art form. He had invited me to his birthday party because I had fixed something for him. A calculation problem with his fuel cost allocation that his bookkeeper had been getting wrong for a year, and that I had identified and corrected in an afternoon, because 29 years of coaching had made me very good at identifying where the numbers were wrong and why. Rodel had responded to this by declaring that I was brilliant, which was an overstatement, and by inviting me to his birthday, which was not. The party was at his house in a barangay outside the city. 40 or 50 people. The specific generous chaos of a Filipino family gathering that has expanded beyond its original parameters in the way that Filipino gatherings always expand, because the invitation is understood to extend to whoever the invited bring and whoever they know, and the food is always made in quantities that assume this expansion in advance. Tables in the courtyard. Music from a speaker that was too large for the courtyard but that nobody was going to argue with. Children conducting their own parallel event somewhere behind the main one. The smell of lechon, the roasted pig that was the centerpiece of the table, perfuming everything within 50 meters. I was standing near the food with a plate and a beer when Rodel appeared at my elbow with the expression of a man who has identified an opportunity for 2 things he values, which were hospitality and introduction, and who is going to act on both simultaneously. He said, "Joe, come, there is someone you should meet." This is, in retrospect, the sentence. The sentence where the 14 days began. If I had been holding a different plate, or standing in a different part of the courtyard, or if Rodel had been occupied with someone else in that specific moment, the sentence might not have been said, and the 14 days might not have happened, and I would not be sitting on this porch telling you any of this. But he was there, and the sentence was said, and I followed him across the courtyard to a group of 3 women standing near the mango tree. Divina was the one in the middle, 32 years old. She worked as an accountant for a local agriculture company and had the specific quality that people who are good at accounting have, which is a precision of thought that you feel in conversation as a particular kind of attention, the attention of someone who is tracking what you are saying and what you are not saying simultaneously and filing both accurately. She had her mother's eyes, which I did not know yet because I had not met her mother, but which I would come to understand was the thing the people who loved Divina said about her eyes, when they wanted to convey that the eyes were the essential thing. Rodel introduced us. He said, in the manner of a man who considers himself a talented matchmaker, "Joe is American. Joe is brilliant with numbers. Joe is also very available." He delivered this last piece of information with the satisfaction of someone who considers availability a selling point, and who is not going to be talked out of that position. Then he left us with the efficiency of a man who has lit a fuse and is content to let the chemistry proceed. I said, "He means well." She said, "He always means well. It doesn't always mean he should." I said, "Fair assessment." She said, "You are the American who fixed his fuel allocation." I said, "He mentioned that." She said, "He mentions it to everyone. You are his favorite topic this month." I said, "What was his favorite topic last month?" She said, "A dog that learned to open the gate." She looked at me with a mild seriousness that I was beginning to understand was her default register. The mild seriousness of a person who finds most things genuinely interesting and who does not perform enthusiasm about things that do not earn it, but who is also not performing the seriousness. It is simply how she meets the world. The dog was more impressive. The gate was complicated. I laughed. It was a real laugh, the kind that arrives before you have assessed whether the situation warrants it. The kind that means the thing was genuinely funny to you, and you did not have time to manage the response. I had not laughed like that in 3 months of Dumaguete, which had been good months in the ways I have described, the Boulevard and the Turo Turo and the Cebuano lessons, but which had been quiet months in the interior register, the register where laughter of that specific kind lives. We talked for 2 hours, at the party, around the food, while Rodel's relatives danced to the music from the too large speaker, and the children's parallel event became audible in intervals, and the lechon was reduced from spectacle to bones, with the thoroughness that only a large family can achieve. We talked about the fuel allocation, and how I had found the error, which she found genuinely interesting, in the way that accountants find other people's numerical errors genuinely interesting, the interest of a professional recognizing a problem in their domain. We talked about Millfield, which she had not heard of, and I described it in the way I had learned to describe it to Filipinos, as a very small town in a state in the middle of the country, and she said, "What do people do in very small towns in states in the middle?" And I said, "They watch football and they talk about the people who watch football." And she said, "And you were the football person." And I said, "I was the football person." And she said, "That explains several things." And I said, "What things?" And she said, "The way you stand, like someone who is used to being watched." I did not know what to do with that observation, so I said nothing, and she moved to the next topic, with the ease of someone who delivers accurate observations and does not require you to do anything with them. We exchanged numbers at the end of the evening, not dramatically. She had Rodel's number, and she said she could reach me through Rodel if she needed to, and I said that seemed unnecessarily complicated when the direct route was available, and she said, "True." And she put her number in my phone with the practicality of a woman for whom a phone number is a phone number and the exchange of it is a logistical event rather than a declaration. She texted the next morning. Not a message of particular content, a question about the fuel allocation error, a specific technical question that I recognized as a genuine question and also as the opening of a conversation that both of us understood was not entirely about the fuel allocation. I answered the technical question. She asked a follow-up. I answered that. She said thank you. I said you're welcome. There was a pause of approximately 45 minutes, and then she said, "Do you know the coffee place near the market? The one with the blue sign?" I said I did not, but I could find it. She said, "Tomorrow at 9, if you want to talk about something other than fuel allocation." I said, "What would we talk about?" She said, "We'll find out." We found out. We talked about her work, which she described with the precise dissatisfaction of someone who is good at what she does, and who has discovered that being good at something and finding it meaningful are not the same category, and that she had been treating them as the same category for 7 years, and was beginning to question the treatment. We talked about Jasmine, who was her niece and not her daughter, but who she helped raise because her sister Rowena had gone to work in Dubai when Jasmine was 3, and who sent money on the first, and called on Sundays, and who was missed in the specific way of people who are present through their provision and absent in their actual presence, which Davina described with the careful neutrality of someone who understands the necessity without fully accepting the cost. We talked about accounting and football and small towns and large ones, and the specific experience of being in a country that was not yours for long enough that it began to feel like it might be. She said, "How long have you been here?" I said, 3 months. She said, "And before 3 months, what were you expecting?" I said, "I was expecting to find out if it was possible to live a different kind of life than the one I had been living." She said, "And?" I said, "It is possible." She said, "Just possible." I said, "More than possible. I am still finding out the more than." She looked at her coffee. Then she said, "That is an honest answer." I said, "I try to give those." She said, "Most people don't. Most people give the answer that sounds best rather than the one that is true." I said, "I spent 29 years coaching 17-year-olds. They can tell the difference between the true answer and the one that sounds best better than most adults can. You learn to give the true one." She looked at me for a moment with the mild seriousness that was her default. Then she said, "We will meet again, same place, Friday." Not a question. I said, "Friday." I want to tell you about the 10 days between the coffee and the proposal, because the 10 days are the material, and the material is where the stupidest thing I have ever done was assembled, piece by piece, from ingredients that were individually reasonable and that combined into something that was not. The ingredient of loneliness. Not the dramatic kind. The accumulated kind. 3 months of a beautiful place and a good life, and the boulevard and the Turo, and the Cebuano lessons, and nobody who knew the name of the town in Ohio where I had spent 30 years, or what it felt like to walk into a stadium on a Friday night in September with 37 teenage boys who had been preparing for this specific game for 4 months. Nobody who knew any of the interior of a life that had been lived fully before Dumaguete. Davina knew. 2 coffees and a birthday party, and she knew more of the interior than anyone I had met in 3 months. The ingredient of the Philippines itself. I want to say this carefully because the Philippines is not responsible for what I did, but it is part of the context in which I did it. There is a quality of warmth in that country that operates at a frequency I had not encountered before. A warmth that is not performed or managed, but that is simply the temperature of daily interaction. And when you arrive in it from a life that has been conducted at a lower temperature for long enough, you can mistake the warmth of the context for the warmth of a specific person, and the warmth of the country for the country having an opinion about you specifically. I was confusing those things. I know that now. I did not know it then. The ingredient of Davina herself, who was the best version of those ingredients, because she was a real person, with a real intelligence, and a real quality of attention, that made being the object of her attention feel like being seen in the way that you want to be seen, and that you have been waiting to be seen for longer than you admitted. And the ingredient, the one I am most ashamed of and the most honest about, of being 63 years old and standing on the far side of the life I had planned, and not wanting to waste any more of the time that was left on the management of feelings that the management of feelings had cost me all the previous years.